Hello, welcome to 9394, a music podcast with me, Travis. I hope you're doing good. I don't have a lot of tattoos. Well, or I do have a lot of tattoos. I don't know. It depends on how many tattoos you have or how many tattoos you think are a lot. I have like 12 tattoos. 13? 12? Anyway, something like that. And one of them is the logo for Quentin Tarantino's production company, A Band Apart. It's also the logo from Reservoir Dogs. Now, granted, I got this tattoo almost a quarter of a century ago, and it's kind of not looking so hot these days. 4 dudes walking on the back of my neck in a big splotch. What are you going to do? Maybe not get any more tattoos. At any rate, that should say something to you, I guess, about how I feel about Quentin Tarantino. And I have another podcast, by the way, called Cinema 9, where I talk about movies all the time. In this episode here that I did with returning guest, Mike Krupinski, it kind of gives a little bit of insight as to what my other podcast is like, although Mike Krupinski has never been on that podcast, and I do have a couple other guys on that show who have been on this podcast. So this episode was kind of funny because it felt like a 93, 94 Cinema 9 hybrid a little bit to me to be talking about a movie so much. But this is my first soundtrack that I'm doing on the show. Mike picked Pulp Fiction from 1994. There's a lot to be said about that soundtrack, and here's me and Mike saying it. Thanks for coming along.
Get down, 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 get down.
Hey, Trav, are we there?
Hey, what's going on, man?
How are you, brother?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Good, man. Busy and all, but you try to find little pockets of time to rest, relax, do what you got to do, and kind of get yourself right again, you know? Because life just comes at you so fast.
It's fair to be what you once said. Thanks for coming back on to the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, this is awesome, Travis. I've looked forward to this ever since we had that discussion about doing another podcast together, and I can't really think of a better, soundtrack, album, record to discuss than Pulp Fiction, because 2024, it's the 30th anniversary, and there's going to be so much to celebrate about it, and there's going to be so much to talk about and unpack going back 3 decades to how it all came together.
My God, yeah, 3 decades. I can't believe it. I haven't watched Pulp Fiction in a long time, and I turned it on this morning. I figured, why not? I'm about to sit here and talk about it. What a touchstone in American culture. For our generation, for the last 30 years, what a interesting movie to be so beloved, because it's not very conventional.
No, it's not. And Quentin Tarantino, coming off the heels of Reservoir Dogs the year before, I think he had a lot of creative momentum going forward into developing a project like this, because all of these moving parts that come together, the cast is amazing, number one, aside from the soundtrack. But to get all of these characters in the same room, so to speak, at the same time to produce a movie such as this, the Uma Thurmans, Eric Stoltz, Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Willis, John Travolta, Harvey Keitel, the list goes on and on, of all of these characters that come together for this common cause, because Quentin Tarantino has this great vision of what he entails to be this movie unlike anything else I think we've ever seen up until that point. Because when you first see this movie and then you digest it afterwards, much like I did, it seems a bit disjointed because it's not the conventional way to tell a story. However, when you circle back, if you have what I would consider, if you have the guts to watch it again and try to piece it together in your mind, you start to see the picture unfold. You start to see Quentin Tarantino's genius.
If you're familiar with the movie, then you're able to fill in the blanks and like reorganize it in your head as you watch it, which makes you really an active participant in watching it, which is fun. But it's also, it's a hangout movie, as he would say. There's not a super congealed plot here. There's just kind of like spending time with these characters. There's interesting things going on, don't get me wrong, but like it's not a linear plot, and just like it's not linear storytelling.
I think, Travis, it took me about 10 times of watching this movie because it's become one of my favorites. So I'll watch it probably on average now once a year just to refresh my memory and get a few laughs. But the thing is, when you watch it again, you're reminded of specific little instances in the movie that maybe you didn't see previously, okay? And so you'll walk through it cerebrally and then think, I didn't see that in the movie. Much like at the beginning of the movie, for example, John Travolta is walking past Honey Bunny and Tim Roth's character, okay, Pumpkin, and you don't even really notice that he's there unless you're paying attention to it. He's off going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
But it took me 10 times of watching the movie to catch that, okay? And so there's always these, what you call these little Easter eggs in these movies. And you go back and you'll watch it again and go, damn, I didn't know that was there. And then all of a sudden it comes back to you again to the surface in your head and you're thinking, man, if only I had eagle eyes every time I'd watch it, I would catch all these little nuances. But that's the beauty of a movie like this is years later, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, it's so rich. Now, we both obviously came to the soundtrack through the movie. That's how we got into the soundtrack. But do you remember getting the soundtrack and getting into it, like listening to it when you were a kid?
I had to go back again because when I watch a movie, I think sometimes the soundtrack is a subplot and it's secondary information in my head. Having worked in radio and television for, the better part of a decade, you're trained as a broadcast talent to have 3 and 4 sounds in your headphones at all times because you're listening to so many different things, say when you're on site for a particular broadcast like I was for radio. And so what I do is there's usually what I have is called a primary audio sound. Primary audio sound in this case relates to Pulp Fiction is I'm watching visually what's going on.
Okay.
And so the soundtrack then became the secondary part in my brain to try to follow. And almost subconsciously, I'm following the story and not realizing that the music is making the story enhanced, making it a better part of me to watch this and to focus on the dialogue, the characters, and the depth of the story that's being told. So for me, the soundtrack, I actually had to circle back to it, and I got a copy of it after I watched the movie. And I listened to it intently because a lot of times, and I had discussions with this leading up to it with other people to our podcast, was music makes the movie and the movie makes the music. And if you can marry those two perfectly, it becomes a memorable soundtrack of all time. It becomes iconic. It becomes a Saturday Night Fever, for instance.
Right.
And as legendary as this movie is, the soundtrack is just as legendary. And I think a lot of people, it resonated well with a lot of people. And it also enhanced a lot of musical careers for the artists that appeared on the soundtrack as well.
The whole resurrection of the career of John Travolta has always been the main focus when talking about this movie. But obviously it did a lot for Dick Dale. It did a lot for Kool and the Gang. It did a lot for Al Green in terms of bringing them to audiences that had either forgotten them or had not ever heard them, really. I remember getting into the soundtrack because as a teenager, I was fucking obsessed with Reservoir Dogs. Like, I mean, obsessed. Like I would be at the cafeteria and someone would just say one line because they knew it would like set me off, and I would just like regurgitate the lines from the movie for the next hour or whatever. So I was like super into that, and I had that soundtrack. So I was really ready for Pulp Fiction when it came out. And of course, I leapt on that soundtrack too. And I was thinking about it in preparation for this episode. I don't know that I've given him the credit in my life in terms of setting me up to have an interest in people like Al Green and genres of music that predated my existence. I was not really a kid that was into the 70s music or, Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and all that kind of stuff. I was very focused in the now, which for me was 93, 94. And this album and the Reservoir Dogs album, and then like later the Dead Presidents album, in time, I ended up getting into all kinds of stuff that I think that maybe I wouldn't have gotten into had I not had this kind of bedrock.
I think you bring up an excellent point, Travis, because a lot of times soundtracks, and they don't even necessarily have to be movie soundtracks, but just albums in general. When you listen to an album from a particular time period, if you're not necessarily from that time period, like say it predates you, for instance, it opens a ton of doors for you to do some exploration, to find, okay, why do I like this song? Because I like this song. Let's check this artist out and see what this artist has done other than the song that I'm listening to.
Yeah.
So what it does is it allows you, in your musical landscape and exploration, it allows you to go back and figure things out even more so than just where you start from the point of origin. And for me, the Saturday Night Fever did that for me. And again, another John Travolta soundtrack, another link to John Travolta. When I was a wee lad, I think it was knee-high to a grasshopper, I saw Saturday Night Fever in the theaters with my folks. Now, my folks probably shouldn't have taken a young wee lad like me to see a movie like that. But, nonetheless,
right.
I remember seeing it in the theater, remembering it when I was a small kid. And so what that does for you, though, is you're exposed to particular artists. And in that case, it was the Bee Gees. My mother loved the Bee Gees. So what I would do is she had all the albums of the Bee Gees. So I would sit on the floor and look at all the liners from the old LPs and just kind of soak in the information. So later on in my travels of furthering music, I could go back and refer to the Bee Gees and say, oh, yeah, I remember that. What else did they do? And kind of do this nice circle, if you will, to go around and kind of complete it in your head of, this is why I like this artist, or this is why I like this song. And it makes more sense to you as you get older. So I think you and I share that in common with references to particular songs or albums, and even with the Pulp Fiction soundtrack too. I don't think I would have listened much to, for instance, Urge Overkill.
You'll be a woman soon. I love you so much, can't count all the ways I died for you, girl, and all they can say is he's not your kind. They never get tired of putting it down, and I never know when I come around what I'm gonna find. Don't let them make up your mind. Don't you look good? You'll be a woman soon. Please.
They weren't on my list of bands to listen to at that particular time. But since they did that Neil Diamond cover, Girl, You'll Be the Woman Soon, it prompted me to listen not only to them, but to go back and listen to Neil Diamond's version and figure out, where did this come from? And what was their thinking as an artist when they did this? And so I think that song did everyone justice, from the viewer, the listener, to themselves as artists, and even to Neil Diamond, to pay homage to him.
Yeah, and I was actually a big fan of Urge Overkill when this album came out because of their 1993 album Saturation. And it was weird to see them get bigger with a song that had come out in 92. But to get to your point about it being like this circular thing, also, the movie making the music and the music making the movie, it really makes you think of Misery Lou, the Dick Dale song. That song, after this movie came out, it would be in like fast food commercials and car commercials and all this other kind of stuff, but it always invokes Pulp Fiction. Like, you hear that song, which was decades old when this movie came out, and it's been completely repurposed to be the music for Pulp Fiction, even though it only plays for like half the credits before like the radio dial changes and you get something else. I mean, talk about fucking iconic. Just bam, you hear that song and you are in the movie.
Dick Dale is such a boss, and don't think that he didn't love the adulation after this.
I'm sure he didn't mind.
Every commercial on television, they were trying to pimp and sell all these different things, and you hear the surf music underneath, and I think Dick Dale was just smiling all the way to the bank on that one because,
sure.
Such a resurgence for him too, because I was talking about this with some music friends of mine, and basically, okay, what compromises the basis of surf music? Well, one, you've got to have a badass guitar, okay? A lot of times it's those old 50s Fender Telecasters, single coil pickup right underneath the neck. And then you've got to have this badass amp, okay? And this amp has got to have as much reverb that you could soak out of it as possible and as little distortion as you could want, okay? And so I picture Dick Dale on stage with this setup, and he's just wailing away at these single note lines, and he's ripping this stuff together. And it forms the basis of this iconic vision in your head, because nothing else sounds like surf music. You can stand this up against anything else, Travis, and it has its own niche for the rest of our lives plus a million, okay? And this is what surf music has accomplished by this particular sound. So I think, like I said, Dick Dale sitting on the mountaintop going, you know what? I did my job. This is what I was born to do, man. I am surf legend. So like you were saying, this is cemented in people's minds forever, and this is what a soundtrack can do. Just one song on a soundtrack, okay? Right. And a perfect storm lines up. A great movie, great soundtrack, great artist, great song equals icon.
Yeah.
I think now, 30 years later, as we sit and discuss the movie here, I think it's very difficult to do. And it's not necessarily in the hands of the artists themselves, but it's in the consumers who really enjoy this type of medium.
Yeah, and the consumers really embraced surf music again. We think of the 90s and we remember the resurgence of swing music, for instance, like swing dancing and all that kind of stuff, to where it's like almost a cliche now. But we kind of have forgotten, I think, the way that this movie helped bring back surf music as a fad for like a little bit of the mid 90s. And again, kind of like built a foundation for folks to be into it for the rest of their lives, as the case may be, those that were too young to have explored it during its heyday. Do you have a favorite track that you can choose from this album?
I would have to say my favorite track, if I had one, would probably be Chuck Berry's Teenage Wedding.
It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished him well. You could see that Pierre did truly love the mademoiselle. And now the young monsieur and madame have rung the chapel bell. C'est la vie, say the old folks. It goes to show you never can tell. They furnished off an apartment with a 2-room.
Let me explain a little bit about this. Now, number one, because I'm a music guy, I should know my music history. But when I saw the movie, I had no idea who sang that damn song. Yeah. Okay? It went right over my head.
Sure.
First and foremost, okay? Well, I'm a young guy who saw it. I actually saw Pulp Fiction in the theater back in the day. But I wasn't really thinking about, well, who sings this song, who sings that song, and things of that nature.
Sure.
But as I started to dig deeper into the movie, recently, within the last 10 years, I figured out Chuck Berry sang that song. So anyone who's in the music industry, don't worry about my knowledge of this. I know it now. Okay. Yeah. So when the Jackrabbit Slim Twist contest comes up, and Mia Wallace and Vincent Vega are up on the stage there, and they're getting into it, I instantly loved the song, not only for its tempo, not only for its feel, but for what the characters were doing with regards to the twist. And here again is movie equals music, music equals movie. A perfect combination of a song that lifts up a part of the movie and enhances it like 1,000-fold. And so it prompted me to look up Chuck Berry a little bit more, discover more of his music, and then discover, the words to the music. And so I was learning the words, the lyrics, and so every time I see that part of the movie, I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, c'est la vie, say the old folks, it goes to show you never can tell, right? So you're learning the song. So it enhanced my life in a lot of ways and became a song that now every time I hear Chuck Berry, even though I may hear like Maybelline or, Run Run Rudolph, I always think of Teenage Wedding in a lot of ways when I think of Chuck Berry. So yeah, that's got to be my favorite song on the whole soundtrack.
Awesome. And it's such a polished production of that song, too, in terms of some of the stuff, because he was operating so early in the recording period that some of those recordings are a little grainier, a little more just not as solid. But that one sounds like it could have been recorded last week. And you talk about an iconic scene in an iconic movie. That whole, the fucking fingers over the eyes, in the V thing, that whole dance sequence is maybe arguably the pinnacle of the movie, like the part that people think of the most. But I am extremely embarrassed to say that I had to pick that as my least favorite song, personally. Notwithstanding the fact that, Chuck Berry helped invent rock and roll, and I've got nothing but respect for him. And so I think it's kind of a dick move for me to choose it to be my least favorite. I acknowledge that.
You're honest, right? I mean,
if I'm honest with myself, it's the one I get least excited about. But I like every song on the soundtrack, so I never ever skip it. And it is like an upbeat and like happy song, so I can appreciate it. But it's just a little, so the 50s surf stuff, I am on board for. When you start getting into like 50s actual rock, it's not really my scene. And even if I respect him, like Chuck Berry and the contribution that he's made, which has not still been properly realized by American society or society at large. But just no sure what's wrong with that movie. But what are you gonna do? Stroke some folks.
Travis, hey, let's take a minute here and digress, because from my days in radio, we always did cross promotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone who's listening to this podcast should know that this is not Travis and mine's first rodeo together.
It's true.
Now, Travis and I did a previous podcast, and if you're interested, you should check out episode 47, Travis and Me. We talk about PJ Harvey's second record from 1993, Rid of Me. So this is our second rodeo together, me and Travis. Going forward, I think it's a good idea that, people like to cross promote things, because if you haven't heard something in particular previously and maybe you want to check it out, it's always a good idea, I think, to kind of remind listeners that, hey, you guys sound like you've been working together before, but have you done this previously? And so, the answer would be yes. So, check out Travis's episode 47 if you get a minute and listen to that particular podcast, especially if you're a PJ Harvey fan, since she's doing a North American tour this year in 2024.
Yeah, saw that and thought of you.
I had to squeeze that in there real quick before we continue.
No, I appreciate it for sure. I hope you get to see her on this tour.
Actually, I did. I got tickets to see her, and it's going to be great. I think I'm looking forward to it. First time that I'll ever see PJ Harvey perform live. So to kind of wrap that in a nutshell, that whole thing is going to come full circle for me come fall.
That's awesome, man. I had to pick my favorite song from this movie, and I really struggled between two really similar songs. Speaking of surf rock, I really struggled between Bullwinkle by the Centurions and Comanche by the Rebels. And eventually I have to settle on the Comanche by the Rebels, which, talk about another scene of the movie that really loads what's going on when you hear the song, because this is the infamous,
I know where you're going,
yes, this is the infamous Bring Out the Gimp scene in the pawn shop with Peter Green and Ving Rhames. So it's a brutal scene, and it's really difficult to separate the scene from the song. But I'm listening to the song lately, driving around and like cleaning my house and stuff, and every time it comes on, I always get the same feel. It makes me think of like a faster, sped up version of Artie Shaw's Nightmare, where it's like it would be perfect in hell, but like a cartoonish depiction of hell, like a fun time, squirrel nut zippers kind of like, woohoo, is it hell fun kind of music? You know what I mean? So every time I hear it, it's just like, it makes me feel good in this weird kind of spooky, almost getting anally raped kind of way, I guess, because that's what's happening in the movie. But it's a good goddamn song, and it's badass too. Like, it's the kind of song that would have worked great in a fight scene or something like that. I guess it kind of does in a way, because that scene ends with a shotgun blast.
It's aggressive. It's a very aggressive piece of music. I'll say that, number one. But two, I get triggered by that sax. Every time I hear that sax in that piece, I want to die. Seriously, does it make me think of exactly what's happening? Okay, when you hear that da 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 da, I'm like, don't go in there. Da 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 da. Like,
Dread.
and I keep saying, Butch, hurry up with that damn sword, will you? I mean, come on, help a dude out, why don't you? Okay, it's like every time I hear it, it's just like, oh, and then for me, the big payoff is step aside, Butch. And I'm like, oh, that scene's over. Oh man, I got through it again, you know?
And when that sax comes in, it's so raw and like urgent. Again, like the recording, the production of it, like it doesn't sound like any sax I think I've ever heard in any recording ever. It sounds like so unique to that song. It's awesome.
No, I'm ruined by saxophone playing now for the rest of my life. Okay, I know a couple really good saxophone players I've jammed with before, but seriously, Travis, that one I can't.
I don't blame you. I acknowledge that it's a controversial choice.
But I can see why it's your favorite, though, because, I mean, that has got to be one of the most memorable pieces of music in a movie, I mean, you ever want to hear.
Yeah, that you want to hear. Yeah, for sure. Moving on, what about your least favorite?
Gosh, it's least favorite is such a subjective phrase, because you don't really want to say that something sucks or something isn't your favorite. I try to look for the good in, every song. I try to find content and value, especially emotional content, and how it applies to like in this case, a soundtrack. How does it apply to a movie? I think, man, if there's got to be one that I'm not really feeling, it would have to be The Son of a Preacher Man by Dusty Springfield.
Preacher's son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd come along. When they gathered around and started talking, Cousin Billy would take me walking. Out through the backyard we go walking. Then he looked into my eyes. Lord knows to my surprise, the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was. He was. Yes, he was. Being good isn't always easy.
I don't want to say that the song is bad, okay? I really don't. But for some reason, when I hear that song and I know the content of the movie, where it's at and how it's involved, I mean, emotionally, it doesn't do a whole lot for me, I'll be honest. But at the same time, I understand the content and the value of where that song was placed, because I know that the consultants for the movie did a great job with Quentin Tarantino to kind of help place these songs accordingly to help build each emotional content of the scenes of the movie. So I got to tread real lightly on that. Dusty Springfield, it's great. It's a great song. I don't want to do it any harm, okay? I think the song is wonderful. It's just for me in the movie, if I got to put a song at the very bottom of my list, unfortunately, it's got to be that one in my book.
That's why I typically, when I do this podcast, try to frame it as least favorite. I used to say like the weakest song on the album, but I kind of stopped saying that. That sounds less subjective. If you're looking at a list of songs, especially a diverse group of songs from a bunch of different artists, which I'm excited, I'm finally doing my first movie soundtrack for this podcast, by the way. I'm glad you picked it for many reasons, including that one.
Oh, yeah.
But when you're looking at all these different songs, like it's kind of impossible not to have some that stand out to you more than others, and there's going to be at least one or two that kind of sit towards the bottom. And Son of a Preacher Man, I respect it. And I really have a lot of affection for its use in the TV show The Office. There's a really funny, memorable scene with Melora. What's her name? I forget her name. It's not like I hate it either, but yeah, it's one I considered for my least favorite as well. So I understand.
Yeah, like I said, I think we had to tread lightly over that because I think least favorite does it the most justice. Rather than, hey, which song do you think sucks the most? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just such a negative way to look at things, right? So you want to try to put it in its proper context and pay its due there, okay? But maybe it's just not as favorite of yours as others. So, I mean, because some soundtracks, Travis, I mean, you've got, an A-list of all these great songs, and it's hard to, like, have that running order. It just really is have that favorite running order.
I think it's an important question because it forces me and the guests to approach
the album, whatever album is in question, critically and honestly. But at the same time, I do this show to celebrate these albums. And that's like the whole idea, right?
Yeah, I think you're right about being a celebration of things, because you want to discuss these things openly, and you want to, revisit maybe something like, your favorite scenes from the movie, favorite songs, all those little things. I think it's great to talk about them rather than just set them aside because maybe you're not as familiar with it, or maybe it's something that you're just not into.
And I think you make a great point in connecting that song to its placement in the movie itself, because every other album that I've done for this show, there is not a specific visual connotation that comes with it. But for this song, for this movie, it's not really that important of a scene. I mean, it's him walking into the house where Mia Wallace is, and she's kind of spying on him, with her home cameras or whatever. But it fits that scene very nicely. I mean, you're right about that. It's hard to imagine a different song in that place now.
I've got to interject something here, Travis, because that's worth noting. And I mean, you and I have seen this movie a number of times, and I'm sure other people listening have done so as well. But I mean, I've never seen in my life, in a movie, one character, Vincent Vega, use the bathroom in a movie as much as he's been in the John in that sequence. Every time I turn around, that guy's on the toilet, he's in the bathroom, he's walking to the bathroom. I mean, I've never seen that before.
You're very right.
The all-time character for bathroom use in a movie. I thought it was kind of odd in a way, but yet I think maybe it's like, I'm going to say it's a backstory, Travis, to Vincent's character. I don't know. What do you think about that?
His backstory being IBS. I think it's foreshadowing, probably, because he ultimately dies in the bathroom, and he wouldn't have died had he not spent so much time in the bathroom. So I guess you're right, though. I mean, I never thought about it before, but there's a long talk with himself in Mia Wallace's bathroom, which he's in there for a long time while she's overdosing. There's the bathroom at the restaurant. There's the bathroom when he gets shot in at Butch's.
Yep.
Is there a fourth?
No, I only counted 3.
It's still a lot for a movie.
Yeah, if you go more than one, I mean, this character's got the bathroom covered, man, But yeah, you mentioned, so Vincent, he's in the bathroom when he gets shot, obviously, by Butch. I mean, that was the ultimate death knell. But the other one was he was in the bathroom, as you said, as Mia Wallace is overdosing. The thing I noticed about that, if I'm going to dig deeper into these thoughts for a second, is that Vincent, I don't want to say it's a selfish point of view from his character, but there's something about how much time was spent, in those particular segments where Vincent ultimately, bit the bullet himself. But had he been a bit more forthright in the bathroom at Mia's place, he could have saved her life.
If he'd come out.
And prevented that.
Yeah.
And also, too, had he not gone to the bathroom at the restaurant, things may have worked out different with him and Jules sitting at the table when Pumpkin and Honey Buddy decided to rob the joint. So they're very critical moments in Vincent's character where you're looking at this going, man, because he's got to go to the bathroom, this is going to happen. And he could have done something to alter the situations.
Yeah. I think that if there's one prevailing theme about the movie, it's the power of random chance. Alexis Arquette comes out and fires that hand cannon, and just every single bullet misses them, and that's like the most dramatic and obvious example of that. But what you're describing
By the way, if Jerry Seinfeld needed a stunt double, that guy's it. That guy's it. I laugh every time I see him come out of the bathroom, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, what's going on? Where's Kramer? I'm like, no, this is the lookalike.
You're not used to seeing Jerry with the Magnum. But I never even thought about what you were saying before, the importance of his bathroom breaks. But you're right. Every single one of them has actually a pretty momentous impact on his life or in the film's plot. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and the thing with Vincent is that I think when you compare him to other characters, he always seems to be having a run-in with another character. For instance, when Marcellus Wallace is talking to Butch inside the bar, which is, hey, let's digress to another song, Let's Stay Together from Al Green.
Yes.
I'm so in love with you. Whatever you want to do is all right with me. 'Cause you make me feel so
Now, think in terms, okay, let's do a quick transition here. So Vincent Vega, while he's in the bar waiting to meet with Marcellus, he's having odds with Butch. Never met the guy, but he just has this angle like he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's not necessarily a friendly guy, doesn't necessarily want to make friends with these people, but yet doesn't show any act of kindness towards anyone. So when you look at Vincent's character throughout the whole movie, you see why he suffered the fate that he did at the end of the movie, okay? So now we transition to Butch and Marcellus. Here's another great example of a song enhancing part of the movie. So Marcellus is talking to Butch about throwing the fight. In the background, Al Green's, let's stay together. And how that song plays later on in Marcellus and Butch's relationship, because now, later in the movie, Butch throws the fight, is going to make more money than he made from Marcellus. But then later on, Marcellus and Butch actually meet each other during the anal rape scene.
So they stay together.
The whole let's stay together theme kind of goes hand in hand. But subliminally, when you first hear that song and see them sitting in the bar, you're not thinking of it. So for me, this only comes after watching it and absorbing it a number of times to figure out, man, that song really had an emotional impact on the characters in that movie.
And you've put a lot of thought into it. I think you're right. I think that's a deliberate choice, but I'd never thought of it before. And man, that's another one that was high in the running for best song on the album. That's like the quintessential Al Green song. And again, I don't think that a lot of people in our generation would have necessarily been keen on that one had we not had that in the soundtrack.
Yeah, because Al Green was such a great performer back in the day. And, with Al Green, if you hadn't studied his body of work, and even if you were from that time period, Al Green probably had a greater emotional impact on viewers in that movie, knowing his history and backstory of making such great music. For me, it was much like you. I was late to the party with Al Green and had to actually, clamor back to figure out what his artistic background consisted of.
Yeah.
But that song in particular, I think, it's his signature song in my book.
I agree.
And to have that as a cornerstone in this soundtrack, I think not only helped his career further and again, open doors for other people to discover his music, but also to cement that legend of Quentin Tarantino and his consulting staff with putting such a great song with a great part in this movie.
Oh yeah. He's like the only director, I think, that rivals Scorsese in terms of his ability to pick not just the exact right songs, but the exact right moments of songs and where to employ them in his movies. What about a song that is underrated for you?
Well, I've got 3 of them. If I could go 3 deep on this, Travis, I would. Okay. Only because it was so hard for me to distinguish between the songs. And I don't want to sound like a windbag here, but I mean, I got 3 good ones really to discuss because, if any of these songs are underrated, I mean, when you go back and you actually find out where they're placed in the movie or where they're at when you're watching the movie, then you'll go, okay, yeah, I didn't really notice that the songs were there. Okay, so number 1 is the Ricky Nelson song, Waiting in School.
Okay.
And that song comes up, obviously, when Mia and Vincent are walking into Jack Rabbit Slim's and you hear that acoustic guitar in the background.
Heading down to the drugstore to get a soda pop, throw a nickel in the jukebox stand, we got to rock. Stool gal, baby, gonna taste some news. You shoulda looked good in them, baby, I'll show. Well, it's a 1, 2, a pair of shoes. Wait for it, get out on the floor. 5, 6, come get your kicks down at the corner of Lincoln and 46, yeah!
But it's not on the soundtrack. I mean, it's on like re-release deluxe issues.
Correct.
Reissues
Correct.
later. Yeah.
Yes. We should note that duly. I had to do some research on the song because I knew it was a Ricky Nelson song, but I didn't know what it was or when the song was initially recorded or what the song was about. Now, that song is only 81 seconds long, and
Really?
Ricky Nelson initially recorded it. And it's just about waiting in school. Do go 5, 6. Okay, it's just this jangly, nice little acoustic beat. But it fits the moment when they're walking into Jack Rabbit Slim's because it sets the tone. Because as they're walking past all these iconic Hollywood celebrities and their doubles, people who are dressed up like them, it gives you a feel and a mood of what Jack Rabbit Slim's is like. Hey, we're walking into this hip joint. There's anybody and everybody who's in this place eating food, drinking, whatever, and having a good time. And then you're seeing, hey, Vince is pointing out, now that's Mamie Van Dorn over there. James Mansfield must have the night off, that kind of thing, right? And Buddy Holly comes and serves them, right? That whole kind of thing there, right? So That song, that's the first, I think, underrated song because I think it slips under people's radar.
Because there's so much going on visually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The visual content is just so overpowering the
Yeah.
song itself.
Makes sense.
The second one is Rumble by Link Ray.
Okay, and that's not on the soundtrack either.
No, it's not on the soundtrack either. That was on, I think, the bonus edition that came out many years later.
And is that the more like the surf song that's kind of that song is fucking great, and I really wish it was on the soundtrack.
Oh gosh, you know what did it for me was it cemented in my head just how underrated that was because Jimmy Page played Rumble at the 2023 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony.
Oh.
And he played that. He paid homage to Link Ray. Jimmy Page walked on stage all by himself with his legendary cherry red Gibson 12-6 double neck guitar and went to town on Rumble. I saw it on YouTube recently and I was just floored. I said, man, I know that song. It's from the movie. And then Jimmy Page comes out. He adds his touch to it later on, okay? Many years later, obviously, after the movie.
Yeah.
I think that song, too, may catch people by surprise because it's just almost incidental music. Like, you're not even paying attention to it because it just sits there.
But it's also something that I know I've heard in other commercials, other movies, that kind of stuff. It's instantly recognizable, but I didn't know the name of it until you said it just now.
Correct. And the third one, Travis, and I know this podcast will probably go down as one that's got 3 underrated songs, but this one's highly underrated because there's also another context. There's also kind of an offshoot to this whole song. So as Butch is driving away from the apartment, and he starts tapping his feet, and he's, yeah, this is how you got to beat him, Butch. That song in the background by the Statler Brothers.
I keep hearing you're concerned about my happiness, but all that thought you're giving me is conscience, I guess. If I were walking in your shoes, I wouldn't worry none. Are you and your friends are worried about me? I'm having lots of fun.
There's some flowers on the wall.
Yep.
That don't bother me at all. I actually had to look that up to find out the Statler Brothers sang that song #1.
Yeah.
But I had to find out the lyrics because the lyrical content opens up an Easter egg. And I don't know if many people realize this.
It's a plea for help for mental health, right? Like he's
Well,
right. People are like checking in on him, and he's like, "I'm fine," but in reality, he's clearly miserable.
exactly.
That's what I got from it.
So Butch is singing the song, okay? And the key line in that song from the Statler Brothers song is smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. Because a year later, Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis star in the movie Die Hard with a Vengeance. And John McClane's character, he's drunk out of his mind. They pull him out of his apartment because he's got to take care of Simon Gruber. And they ask him in the back of the van, what have you been doing, McClane? Smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo.
That's right. That's right.
Such an underrated song for Pulp Fiction, but yet it opens up all these doors to these little Easter eggs. If you're the astute, keen mind like I try to be, you find out that there's something more to this down the road. So yeah, that would be my list of underrated songs.
And it's such a goofy song. I was almost a little afraid that you were going to choose it to be your least favorite because it's kind of a goofy little song. I could see people not being into it, but I love it. It's a feel-good little, weird little ditty. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if Bruce Willis had anything to do with selecting that song for any of his particular role because he seemed to really dig it, to dig the lyrics. Otherwise, I don't think he would have mentioned that little ad-lib in Die Hard with a Vengeance a year later. Yeah, he probably liked that song without even having to ask him.
He must have, I'm guessing. And clearly that line in Die Hard with a Vengeance was some sort of reference to, hey, me and Samuel were reunited here. And even though they didn't really share screen time hardly at all in Pulp Fiction.
Right.
I went with a song that I thought going in I was going to choose to be my least favorite. I really thought I was going to choose as my least favorite to be Maria McKee's If Love Is a Red Dress, Hang Me in Rags.
empty. Your eyes are dull. Once we were hungry, now we are full. These ties that bind us can't beat these chains. If love is shelter, I'm gonna walk in the rain.
As a kid, I didn't have the patience for that song. You know what I mean? I was just like some woman with a guitar and like nothing's going on, like skip. And I had this one on CD, so I would like skip that song all the time. And then lately listening to it, I'm like, God damn, this is beautiful. Her voice is incredible and the lyrics are outstanding. Each stanza is just like this different meditation on how love has failed her and how she's going to choose another path. I mean, some of it's kind of like heavy-handed imagery, but man, what a really good song that I have personally really underrated. I'm glad to revisit the album. It gave me a lot more appreciation for that song. And also, you know, her and Urge Overkill are the only artists, I'm pretty sure, on this album that are like contemporary of this movie. Everything else was like 40, 30 years old, you know. That was like a relatively new song for her, which I'd never heard of her before or since.
I think you make a good point, Travis. Most of the songs on the soundtrack are from back in the day, so to speak. And to have the two songs that you mentioned there be more updated, if you will, you know, more towards the 90s at that time, I think it speaks volumes to how you can connect the past and the future all in one soundtrack and have it meld like seamlessly. And you also make mention about when you're at a different point in your life, you're listening to one particular song and it might not grab you then, but then you revisit it years later because you're changing and your thoughts are changing and you're accepting this song in a different perspective now, and you find that it's not the same feel that you had years ago, and it opens up something new in your mind where you're thinking, man, you know, I really missed this when I was younger, but now that I'm listening to it, I can digest it a lot better now because I have a better understanding. So I think you make an excellent point about that.
Yeah, it's like certain foods that you don't like as a kid, and then you get older, you're like, fuck yeah, I love feta, or whatever, you know? It's just like an acquired taste that as you get older, you can have more appreciation for it.
Wait a second, dude. For me, sauerkraut sucked as a kid. Sauerkraut sucks as an adult.
It depends on the food, I guess.
It's the only one. I can't do sauerkraut, man. I'm sorry, I just can't.
I won't make you.
If we played even, I'd be your queen, but someone was cheating, and it wasn't me.
It's such a wonderful soundtrack in that there was so much thought given to this, number one. So much thought and so much pre-planning that went into this. And I think Quentin Tarantino leaned on his consultant team that was led by, her name was Laura Lovelace, and Chuck Kelly also helped out with this. Two particular individuals that I think Quentin Tarantino confided in, had lots of confidence in that they would help him make the right selections. Because what they did was, collectively, they created a masterpiece for the 90s. And for me, this soundtrack, like I said, rates right up there with Saturday Night Fever, for instance, as a soundtrack that you'll always remember. It just goes to show that when you take the care and the time and you have the creative genius collectively amongst individuals who are working together for a common cause like this to put out a great product, sparks fly. Lots of great things can happen from this. And I think it's a soundtrack that is warm and friendly every time you hear it. And like we were talking about, it's very iconic because every time you hear a particular song, you think of a scene in the movie. Just don't play me any more damn saxophone traps. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's the way I view this one. And I'm really, really thankful that we got a chance to discuss this movie because I think we're doing it justice because it's the 30th anniversary in 2024. And a lot of people will be revisiting this movie and the soundtrack and talking about it for days, months, years to come.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you came back on to do the show. And I'm also really thankful that you have highlighted Lovelace and what was the other person's name?
Chuck Kelly.
Yeah, Lovelace and Kelly, because speaking of underrated, they clearly deserve some acclaim here. So I'm really, really glad that you are giving them their due. What a classic album. If I had to choose an album from the 90s that everybody knew, I don't know that this would necessarily be the one, but it would be in the running. You know what I mean? Yeah. It would be in the fucking running.
It should. I think, Travis, we should also make mention, too, that regarding this movie, not every scene had a song that accompanied it. Mm-hmm. First of all, Bonnie's situation, did not have an underlying soundtrack tone to it. Also, the restaurant scene at the end of the movie does not have any music bed at all.
There's no score for this movie. It's all soundtrack.
Yeah. Also, too, the scene where Mia Wallace and Vincent Vega visit Lance's house after she ODs, there's no music bed underneath there either. Yeah. These are very poignant scenes in the movie that let the dialogue and the characters speak for themselves where no music was necessary. So I think we could learn a lesson from this, too, as well as when and when not to have music as an underbed in a particular scene. Again, I go back to the production team. I go back to Quentin Tarantino and his consultant staff, knowing when to pull back on the reins and say, no, we don't need any music here. I think they did a very tasteful job with that.
That's a great point. I think of another soundtrack from that era, say the Natural Born Killer soundtrack, which is a great soundtrack, but like the music is relentless throughout the movie. There's never a moment where it lets up, really. And that can be oppressive almost to a point. Music itself is in part about the silences that exist within it. So a movie needs to have those too. Good point, man. Good points all around. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, it's a favorite movie of mine, and so
I can tell.
To be able to draw from this experience to share it with you, it's been a wonderful experience for both of us here to discuss the little ins and outs of the movie itself.
Agreed. And I want to keep it going because, I always end each show with a question kind of about the 90s generally, but I figured there's a very obvious question to talk about here, which is the movies of Quentin Tarantino. Let's talk about what are your 3 favorite Quentin Tarantino movies if you had to make a top 3 list.
Well, I think Reservoir Dogs kind of started it off for me. Because I think that shows you the genius, It shows you the genius of Quentin Tarantino and what his ultimate objectives were going to be. Mm-hmm. And how his movies kind of tie into one another.
And how he can use music, again, in the same way in that movie.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice alliteration that he puts together because I think his whole body of work, I think in his mind, he wants to tell a story, even though he's not really telling a full story. Mm-hmm. He's telling a story in chapters with his movies. Yeah. So when he goes from one particular angle to another, I think he likes a seamless flow where if you were to watch the movies back to back, maybe there's some connotation there. I don't know because I haven't had the time to do that with his movies. Yeah. But I'm just guessing that maybe if you step inside of Quentin Tarantino's mind, maybe that's what his creative genius is all about to kind of encapsulate him. It's just each movie is like a chapter in a large book of his career and what he wants to do and how he wants to accomplish things. And I think he took a lot of chances. Mm-hmm. He's taken a lot of chances, which you have to do to be creative as an artist because you can't stay the same way, with every movie.
Agreed.
If you did back-to-back movies the same way, people would get tired of it. They'd say that, well, I think you've lost your touch. You don't really know what you're doing, or have you run out of ideas? Mm-hmm. And people need to know that about artists, is that, artists need to change as much as people want them to change and see something new and exciting. So as a director, I think he's done a wonderful job of constantly reinventing what he wants to put out in front of audiences. So these particular 2 movies, because they were made in back-to-back years, I think you start to see that progression happening.
Yeah, I think that Reservoir Dogs is, for me, the number 1 as well, because it really announces one of the great directors of our time. And that his first movie could be one of his very best speaks volumes about his powers as an artist. That's my number 1, too. What's your number 2 for him?
Well, obviously, Pulp Fiction's on the list with Reservoir Dogs, and if I had to choose the third one, I think it'd be Jackie Brown, which came out in 1997.
Okay, that's what I was going to say, is that those are the 3 criminal movies. He kind of moves away from criminal movies. or sort of after that. But so you like that era.
Yeah, I like Jackie Brown because, I'll be honest, I love Pam Grier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
she's
think
great.
Pam Grier is one of the greatest actresses of all time. The different roles that she had to play when she started in blaxploitation movies in the 70s and then she moved forward from there. I think it spoke to her character to get together with a director like Quentin Tarantino and to exercise those creative juices in that forum.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jackie Brown is just an iconic movie as Pulp Fiction in a lot of ways. It may not have gotten the gross receipts at the box office, okay, number one, because, you've got to have a specific taste in mind when you're watching movies. And I think some movies, obviously, they just lend themselves more than others. But I think Jackie Brown put Pam Grier back on the map, and it did well for both Quentin Tarantino and her.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a great example of merging two creative artists together that work going forward to not only help each other out, but to see through a particular creative vision. And I think it was a great movie. I really liked it.
It's criminally underrated. It really is. I think that for me, though, I'm more into his historical takes. And so my second one would probably be Inglourious Bastards. It's got 3 of the best scenes in film I can think of in it. These incredibly long, static scenes with incredible building tension. That's just a master at work. As a historian, I find it fascinating the way that he plays with the past there. I mean, I'm a big Brad Pitt fan, and he is just like, doesn't do enough comedy. And this is a weird instance where we get to have him in his cool badass mode, but also being fucking hilarious. So I really enjoy that. And I guess my third would be Hateful Eight, which I think is really underrated. A lot of people find it too slow, but I think it's incredible.
It's a really good list, Travis. I mean, I guess with Quentin Tarantino movies, there's really no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, that's true.
Instead of a top 3, sometimes you think, man, what about a top 5 or top 10? You know what I mean? Because you have such a hard time choosing between movies that you really like. But it's hard when you have to nail it down to 2 or 3 movies because you really got to think for yourself and go, man, okay, well, I've got to like one movie over another. What sells it for me? And so that's why I like these lists. They're so subjective and they're so free-flowing because what it does, it invites conversation for everybody else. Like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably thinking to yourself, hey, I like Quentin Tarantino movies. Which ones do I like? And hey, they didn't mention this one. They didn't mention this one. And so I think it helps further the conversation even after people listen to a podcast like this.
Do you believe him that his next film, do you believe him that that'll be his last movie?
I don't know. I don't know because here's a very difficult thing for artists to do is to walk away.
Right.
It's very difficult to walk away from the one thing that you love to do the most, and it's the easiest for you to do because it's harder to get involved in something else because you don't maybe have enough time devoted to it. So much like the ever-evolving 33,000 Kiss reunion tours, okay?
Yeah, or the Eagles.
Motley Crue coming back for the 9 millionth time. I think Quentin Tarantino, what you have to realize about him is that I think he's probably just not going to make them anymore. He's not going to announce he's going to do it. He's not going to do it. I think he's just going to do his last movie and walk off into the sunset when he thinks it's time rather than kind of telegraph his last move. Because what that does is it does 2 things for someone. It gives people the opportunity to open that door back up again without having to eat your words.
Yeah.
And number 2, when you're done, hey, mic drop, walk away. I don't need to explain to anybody what I'm doing. Here's my body of work. I'll see you. That kind of thing.
You would think, but he's been telling people for years that he's going to make 10 movies, and the next one's his last movie, so he's really telegraphed that.
Yeah, and maybe he's just trying to help soften the blow with people that really like his movies, that, hey, we're on countdown here, and we're getting to the last one. Maybe it's a publicity stunt, too. You never know what's going on, because a lot of times you want to hype things, and you want to give people something to talk about. So
yeah.
This angle, I think he's doing himself a lot of justice by putting the focus on him, because then it keeps his movies constantly talked about, what he's going to do next.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it also creates this continuous buzz around him and his movies. I think he's doing a great thing with whatever he's doing PR wise. I would say, hey, dude, keep doing it because it's working.
I think there's another way to look at it, though. To me, it kind of speaks to, a lot of artists are insecure. And to me, it kind of says that he's a little insecure, that he's afraid that he's going to lose his touch and then he's going to start putting out crap. Like if he just kind of keeps making them, that his quality would go down. But I mean, Scorsese is doing some of the best work of his career. Coppola definitely took a big dip, but I'm excited about Metropolis, his feature that he's working on. I'm curious if it'll actually play out. I feel like he'll write some books, maybe do some producing, but I think he'll get bored and I think he'll come back, or at least I hope.
Well, if I could tie in PJ Harvey to this a little bit.
Please do.
PJ Harvey, she got out of the conventional album making, I got to go on tour, I've got to promote, after 2007, after her White Chalk album in 2007. 2004 was the last time that she played live with a band, okay, when she was touring then. And she took 2005 and 2006 off, and then she made a drastic change. She said at that point, I don't want to tour and do the album and do this cyclical stuff anymore. I want to change what I'm doing. And so artists, a lot of times they fall into this trap, right? They want to make content, keep the money rolling in for themselves, help other artists that they work with and collaborate. I think it's a very fine line for some artists to walk, but I think it takes courage to know when you're not producing content that you feel is your best, because if it's not badass, it ain't working, okay? And so you can't put out half-ass stuff. Artists could put out a filler record or a B movie and be satisfied with that, but at the end of the day, it's their name on the door.
Yeah.
You don't want your reputation to be ruined because you're just putting something out to put it out. So I think artists in general, I think the content has to be there. It has to be at an extremely high level too, because otherwise I don't think that the artist themselves is going to be satisfied. And so, you know, for Quentin Tarantino, it's one particular path. PJ Harvey had another particular path. All artists have to explore this at some point and find out, you know, what's the best footpath for them.
Yeah, time will tell. Well, Mike, thank you again for coming back on the show. I very much hope that you come back a third time. Third-time guests, they don't have to, but they often pick stuff like from 92 or 91 or 95, so you can kind of get outside the lines of 93, 94 if you want to come back on, and I hope you do, my friend.
Travis, that sounds fantastic. I'm going to do my homework, and yeah, we're going to do another podcast, man. These become addictive. Especially you and me. We have so many great things to talk about when we do, and we feed off each other so well. It's like we've known each other for many years, and I know we just met in the year 2024 early on. So I'm glad to have done this with you again. We've got 2 in the books. Yeah, we're doing a third one, so we'll have to get together and figure out when we're going to do that. But thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you.
I appreciate discussing Pulp Fiction with you. It's a movie that's near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorites, and the soundtrack, again, one of my favorites as well, too. I'm glad to have spent quality time with you to discuss these things and have some fun. Just being 2 guys sitting around, you know, discussing things is, you know, the only thing that's missing are the beers, the pizza, okay, and the music in the background, okay? So, I mean, it's so relaxing and easy to do this with you. So again, I want to thank you for the wonderful opportunity, Travis. And yeah, we'll see you again real soon with another one.
Thanks, Mike. I'm looking forward to it.
Bye.
A big thank you again to Mike for coming on the show and talking about Pulp Fiction with me. It's always good to talk to him, and he's going to come back real soon. And if you are listening to this when this is released, when this is new, you could catch Mike's band, the Snapcat Bandits, along with me and regular guest Dustin Lintz and some other bands that Dustin's in, on Saturday, June 22nd at the New Way Bar in Ferndale, Michigan. And if you missed that, Dustin puts on one of these shows once a month there, and he tells me that there will be another 93, 94 one down the line. But it is a free show. You can meet me if you want to, and Dustin and Mike, and listen to his band, the Snapcat Bandits. Unfortunately, I don't have any new music from him to show you right now, but you can find Snapcat Bandits on Spotify and YouTube and elsewhere. Now, if you want to come on the show, you'd be very welcome to come on the show. I'm always looking to get new guests on here. I'm even looking to get old guests on here. You know, come on back. People are all welcome back. You can do any album you want from 1993 or 1994, so long as I haven't already done that album. I'm really looking for someone to do an album from 1993 that was mentioned in this episode with Mike. The album Saturation from 1993 by the band Urge Overkill. You might recognize this song, Sister Havana, as being part of the 93-94 medley that I used at the starting of this show. Or you might remember it from back in the day. It had kind of a good moment there in 93 and 94 where they had a few singles that were pretty well received in alternative circles. So if you want to talk about this album, that'd be great. Or you could talk about any other album you want to from the era that I haven't already done. Just email me at 9394podcast@gmail.com. Or you could just email me to say hi. You know, I like to say hi to people. That's fun too. Always looking to get people to please rate and review the show, or just click the button that says 5 stars on whatever podcasting app that you're using to listen to this. It would really be much appreciated. It does more than you know. Just take that 5 seconds and do that, please. If you're a regular listener. If you're not a regular listener, then don't feel obliged. But if you are a regular listener, I feel like you're a little obliged. So I'm going to leave it right there. Have yourselves a great one. We'll see you next time. '93-'94, a music podcast with Travis Roy, is a labor of love. It is not and never will be monetized. Please don't sue.